Dominguez clan, and when I say the clan, I mean we had a lot of people that would come together for our gatherings. Not so much anymore. But we had this tradition of getting together after Christmas, usually like the 29th of December or so, to have a Christmas party. It was usually like at some swanky, overpriced venue. My relatives were all very wealthy, and my family, my mom and my dad, were kind of like the black sheep of their families. Dad chose a very altruistic occupation. He was a social worker. Wasn't really interested in making money or anything like that. But anyway, generations would come together to eat, they would drink, be merry. I have these memories of red-faced aunts and uncles toasting things I hardly remember, eating expensive food, telling stories I don't recall. And this was mainly because I was a child at the time, I was a youngster. And really I could have cared less about what the adults were doing or talking about. The kids, in fact, were kind of an afterthought at most of these soirees. But eventually the time would come for opening presents. That was the big deal. In the invitations that went out before the party, everybody was assigned someone to get a gift for. And so we'd all sit down and we'd open these gifts, and of course that was always the best part for me because, well, again, my relatives were rich and they didn't seem to have any reservations spending their money for just this moment. Then the adults would go right back to making merry, and the kids would, we would do what we could to stay entertained. My brothers and I hated those parties. And even now, there's this part of me that when I remember them, I'm like, Yeah. And so we really only went because we knew we were going to get those gifts. Now, as the kids became teenagers and then adults, it became increasingly more apparent each year to the older generations that somehow this tradition needed to get passed on, right? Family is important. I personally was not interested in continuing it. But I have to admit to you today that despite everything that I hated about those Dominguez Christmas parties, the awkward conversations with relatives I only ever saw once a year, the random drunk aunt or uncle demanding little too much of my time, the pretentious food forced on the children, toast points and caviar. What is a child going to do with that? Despite all of that, honestly, I would do anything to get it back. But I know that I can't. I know that it will never be the same, even if I tried, because many of those people are dead, and my father included, now my mom. The memories I have in my head of those times, which I cherish now as an adult, they're just that. They're memories. They were specific only to me. No one else can see them the way that I see them. Honestly, they might not even be accurate, but that really doesn't matter. What matters is the way that I feel about them. That is the beauty and the horror of tradition. So in Mexico, on October 31st, Mexicans celebrate the Day of the Dead, El Día de los Muertos. It kicks off the Christian Triduum, that's a big word, of All-Hallow-Tide. There's another big word. Those are your two big words of the day. A three-day part of the Christian year, which is made up of All Hallows Eve, as you know, Halloween, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day. Now, there are a lot of traditions associated with the Day of the Dead, but the primary purpose is to remember the loved ones that have passed on. One day is for just children who have passed on, and another day is for adults. Fundamentally, I think the reason for the season is that there's something about taking time to remember what we've lost that reminds us of what we still have and how valuable it is. And it's also a lot of fun. So to outsiders, the Day of the Dead can and does seem like a macabre celebration of death, with all the painted skulls you might have seen, the scary imagery. But the truth is that death is not being celebrated. We don't do that as Mexicans. In Mexican culture, death is just a natural part of life. Nothing lasts forever, as the saying goes. When death happens, and it does, you can and should grieve it, of course. It's a loss. But it's also an opportunity to cherish the memory of those who have gone on, to remember them as they were in life, not to obsess over their death. The Day of the Dead isn't about death. It's about life. And it gives us a way to make death less of a scary thing, especially for children. So my family actually didn't actively do a Day of the Dead celebration growing up, but as I said before, there's a lot of things that you do as an adult that really didn't seem to matter when you were younger. So moving from California to Maryland really stirred a need in me to remain connected to the traditions of both sides of my family, the American side and the Mexican side. So from 2011 to this day, each year on Halloween, I celebrate El Día de los Muertos in my own way. At my last church, I would decorate my car's trunk for their trunk or treat in the theme of Día de los Muertos. And so what I would do is I would arrange an ofrenda. So this is one of the central traditions of the Day of the Dead, where you basically set out photos of those that you want to remember. Now, my mom had not yet died, so I would put out a photo of my dad, my brothers, and I at our family's ranch in Santa Paula. And next week, it'll be up there. The truck that you'll see and it looks all shot up. It's just a derelict old truck. It was actually the truck that my dad and my deceased uncle Alfonso wrecked up there. It was their truck. And now it's like a favorite spot for hunters to kind of squeeze off a few rounds, Now, next, what I would do for the ofrenda is I would arrange some of Dad's favorite things to kind of to eat around this photo. The idea is it's supposed to be funny, like things that they liked that seemed kind of like weird. So he loved avocados, mangoes, watermelon. He had a voracious sweet tooth. He would always be bringing home things like pies and his beloved fig Newtons. So those go on the ofrenda. And cap it off in observance of a tradition of remembering, again, something really funny about your loved ones. I would lay down a can of, you may have seen these, sardines in tomato sauce. They're like oval shaped. They have like a gold tint. And he would regularly bring these things home from the grocery store, but nobody would eat them except him. My mom thought it was disgusting. So everyone I talk to about this tradition thinks that it's wonderful, they wish there was something like it here in America. Well, I'm telling you, there is. There really is. Celebrating Día de los Muertos is actually becoming very popular for non-Mexicans. But if you're Christian, you do have a Day of the Dead, and it is All Saints' Day. And today is All Saints' Sunday. That's what we're observing today. So in churches all around the country, people are taking time to remember the dead, to honor the dead. Names are sometimes read or printed in the bulletin. Somber as well as happy music is played. People remember generations of folks that worked to make their church what it is today. It's a peculiar name for the holiday, though, at least to me, All Saints' Day, because if we're really being honest with ourselves, I really don't think too many of us, when we think of our loved ones that have gone on, I don't think we think of them necessarily as saints in the conventional sense, right? I mean, my dad was great and all. My mom, likewise. But I would never call either of them saints, and I think they would laugh at the term if they were around. My mother would be, in fact, the first to point out all her numerous flaws when anyone would attempt to praise her for anything. Now, we have a tradition in church of calling the dead saints, but do we really understand why we do it? So I want to tell you what I know about it. Being a saint means different things to different people, of course. Many of you have roots in Catholicism, and in that religion, saints look very different than they do in United Methodism. So for us, saints are simply people that we believe lived a holy life. I mean, not like Mother Teresa. And they're not supposed to be venerated in that way. That's what we think. But they do provide a good example of what it means to be Christian when we think about who they are and were. It doesn't mean that they didn't have their bad moments, obviously. We choose to remember the good that they did, and we emphasize it when we remember them. It's really just a way of saying, you know what? They got a lot of things right. Another way that we look at saints on All Saints' Day is something called the cloud of witnesses. I've used that word a couple times so far. Have you heard that term before, by the way, the cloud of witnesses? Okay. So the Epistle of the Hebrews says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and run with patience the race that is set before us." That is where that term comes from. So we have this idea that whether these folks are actually watching us or their memory is calling to us, the saints have an effect on our lives here today. Each one of us, I think, is affected in some way by a cloud of witnesses, people who have left us, living or dead. They left an impression. And that impression was a gift, whether we understood it at the time or not. And it's only later on that we recognize it as a gift. Now, for some people, death is all about loss. And many of us have a really hard time with loss. When somebody leaves us, it can be very difficult to let go. I never thought I would be one of those people, but when my father passed away, I finally understood what someone told me a while ago, that you never really get over the loss of a parent. It just kind of gets better with time. Now, it's been nearly 6 years since Dad left my life. But let me tell you, I still remember every part of that day that he died with crystal clarity, as if it had happened yesterday. It's never left me. Even 2 years after he'd gone, when I finally took the initiative to clean out his room in the house because nobody else wanted to go in there, I still took time to smell his clothes, just to see if I could catch a bit of his scent. I did the same thing with the stoles that my brother gifted me that belonged to my mom, to see if I could still remember the way that she smelled. But see, when it came to my mom, unfortunately, I didn't really get the same chance because her stoles didn't smell like her. They kind of smelled like her room, but they didn't smell like her. And I think that might have been why it was so hard for me at first. I was anguished to not have been with her in her final moments, even that final week. Going to Mexico to visit my family there was life-giving, because suddenly I saw my mom everywhere. The first day when Bonnie and I went to my cousin's house, my mom's sisters were there, and when they spoke, I heard my mother's voice. That was particularly difficult to bear. That's why it's so important, I think, to look at every person and every day as a gift. A gift that we should be so grateful for. None of us can see the future or know how much time that we have to cherish our loved ones. Job, from our text this morning, he got that. He had just received the news that his livelihood, his servants, and children had all been wiped out. He had a lot to lose, and he lost it. And yet he also understood that every person comes into this world with absolutely nothing but their health. And when we die, we can't take any of this stuff or these people with us. Everything that we have, everything that we know, everyone we know, everything we are, is only possible because God made it possible. And that thought is a tough pill for some people to swallow. I see so many folks get mad after they lose someone. They look for someone or something to blame. They curse God. They curse the people around them. Death transforms them into bitter people because they can't bring themselves to accept this new reality. They can't bring themselves to accept that their life is different now. And instead of honoring the dead, instead of trying to remember them as the gifts that they were, these angry folks focus almost exclusively on what they've lost. It becomes a poison to them. They emphasize the Lord has taken away instead of the Lord has given. And they completely forget, blessed be the name of the Lord. I've matured a lot over the years, at least I like to think so. And I've learned something. Sometimes the part about the Lord taking away isn't such a terrible thing. I have seen a lot of people at bedsides pleading with God, pleading not to take their loved ones who are obviously in a lot of pain. They beg the doctors to take the most aggressive forms of treatment in an attempt to preserve life, never stopping to think that the life that they are seeking to preserve isn't theirs, and that the quality of that life won't look anything like what they are hoping to achieve. I used to think like that myself. Life at any cost. But you spend enough time in hospitals seeing this play out, seeing death, you get a different perspective. You learn about things like mercy. Times of trial, folks, are an inevitability. Like death, they are a natural part of life. And yet God never designed those tough times to be weathered alone. God has given us wonderful people to surround us and love on us when they happen. And the Lord joins in our suffering even before we're aware of God's presence. Job had every reason to reject God when his children were ripped out of his life. But instead of allowing this affliction to separate him from the Lord, Job realized that his greatest support, his strongest and surest defense, could be found in his Creator. So, he chose worship instead of scorn. Face it, life as it is often less than perfect. There are so many parts of it that we would rather not experience. Some of us think life would be better without heartache, or loss, or any calamity. And yet, brothers and sisters, I assure you, it would not be the same without these things. The truth is that no one knows what life would look like any other way but this way, or the kind of people that we would become if it did look different. We have this life. We have these people. They are gifts, and we do what we can to honor them, living or dead. So in closing, I wanted to offer a suggestion. This is the part in the sermon that we pastors like to call life application, but honestly, it's really up to you. What I'm about to offer you, I offer because it helped me. It might not help all of you. And my suggestion is this: develop a tradition of your own to honor the people in your life, the places in your life, whatever it may be, that you have lost. They don't have to be dead, right? Death is only one way that we lose people. Admit to yourself that every loss you experience diminishes you. Admit it. Then, in recognition of that idea, find a way to remember what those people meant to you, how you felt about them. What did they contribute to your life? What gifts did they give you? Remember them and be grateful. I don't know how, and I don't know why, but something about doing that is good for you. Remember and give thanks.